Hi there, I'm Matthew Herzberg, and this is the Myopia Mindset. My guest for this episode is Dr. Paul Levine. He's a past president of the American Academy of Orthokeratology and Myopia Control. He's a fellow and he's a mainstay at Vision by Design. When you go to Vision by Design, I want you to introduce yourself to Paul Levine and say, hey, I saw your interview on the Myopia Mindset podcast because you are going to learn so much from him in this episode. And if you are a Substack supporter of the Myopia Mindset, if you went to myopiamindset.substack.com, you are going to get an extended version of this episode. And I cannot wait to share it with you. So let's get started. All right, welcome to the Myopia Mindset. This is a podcast where myopia matters, yes, but also what matters is the mindset of the practitioners who are addressing and treating myopia. And I have with me a very special guest in Dr. Paul Levine. Paul, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about this stuff.
Yeah, and if you don't know, Paul is he is an outstanding orthokeratologist and a myopia management specialist. He is a past president of the American Academy of Orthokeratology and Myopia Control. He's been a board member on the International Academy of Orthokeratology and Myopia Control. He has spoken on this subject, in the United States and in the world, and is a very sought after person at AAOMC's Vision by Design. He's a key component, especially of their boot camp program. And Paul, that's one of the many reasons why I wanted to have you on the program, because so many of the high end practitioners in our space have this level of not inaccessibility, but there's this divide. And I kind of use this example of like the champion weightlifter who's being looked at by that person in the gym who's just starting to work out. And they're like, this person is so far past where I am. Like, there's this divide, like when I talk to my father, to Kerry Herzberg, I grew up in his practice. When I ask him about, common issues in ortho-K and myopia, he's like, oh, you just do this, this, and this, no problem. And it's like, but those are problems that the modern optometrist is facing. And one of the coolest things about Paul Levine is he has never lost that accessibility. You know what I mean? Like, Paul, the divide is not there. And I think that's one of the great reasons why you're such a big part of boot camp and Vision by Design. And you can always catch him talking to people at those meetings. So, Paul, that's where I kind of want to focus. Let's start with, what does your practice look like today? Let's describe the weightlifter, the champion weightlifter. So describe your practice. How much of it is ortho-K and myopia management?
Um, I wish I had a perfect answer to that
Mm-hmm.
question, but I'm just going to give you my sort of general thoughts on this. I am a primary care
Mm-hmm.
practitioner, and many and mo often my days are consumed with primary care, medical optometry, um, and of course with a subspecialty in myopia management and ortho-K. So I can tell you this, there's not a day that I am in clinic that I don't probably see at least 3 or 4 myopia patients,
Mm-hmm.
in addition to the other 14 to 20 that I see on a
Right.
given day. So, it's probably 20, 25, maybe 30%, of what
Right.
I do.
Yeah. And that's a lot compared to, I think, the average, doc who's interested in doing myopia management or ortho-K. I've worked with a lot of accounts, a lot of docs who are like, I've done 3 cases over the last couple of months. How do I get more? And you're, doing, to even have 30% of your practice, I think is huge. That's a big part of your practice. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I do. And I look forward to those patients, because primary care can sometimes get a little stale, but managing myopia and especially ortho-K patients, um, I feel so uniquely qualified to help them.
Mm-hmm.
And they come in with greater concerns than a lot of the primary care patients come in with, they're worried about it.
Yeah.
And the parents are worried. The younger kids not as much, but they feed off of their parents' concern. So I
Mm-hmm.
do like that, when they come to see me, it's a destination, it's not an accident that they're in my office.
Right.
And I try really hard to make them sure that they made the right decision by coming to see me.
Gotcha.
So I do take extra time, and I do really try to be very mindful and very uh, careful about how I talk to them, and
Mm-hmm.
try to allay their fears, and
Right.
celebrate the victories, because let's be honest, the beauty of managing myopia is that there are a lot of victories there.
Mm-hmm.
When you can stop or slow the progression significantly, it's like just such a terrific win-win, for everybody involved.
Right. Yeah. And so are these patients coming in to seek you out specifically? Is that the
Sometimes.
yeah?
Yeah. Yep. I mean, I have I have the luxury of being in the same location for 21 years now.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you cultivate a lot of patients that way.
Right.
And you just ask the question, like, how do you get more? Well, you start planting seeds early, and maybe there's not a lot of harvest in those first couple of seasons of planting,
Right.
you know, but you learn and you get better at it, and things start to mature, and then, before you know it, you've got all these people that are already in your practice that now you can really kind of dig in with that conversation. And then parents are your best advocate for sure, right? Moms
Yeah.
groups and parent groups, because they talk. And so when I have new myopia patients that come into the office seeking management strategy, a lot of it is my friend does this.
Mm.
My child's best friend wears these nighttime lenses. Can you tell me about them a little bit more? So that grows things almost exponentially. And
Right.
then I also have, some local optometrists that will refer to me for myopia management stuff because they're not doing it. Or
Right.
if they are, they might be doing it on a more maybe superficial level,
Yeah.
and then when things get a little bit more challenging, they'll refer the patients over to me.
Right. The superficial level, I'm glad you mentioned that because I have been in so many practices. When I was working with J&J, I would just cold call accounts. I would travel all over the country. I was the like they called it the white space role. Like I went wherever we didn't already have a person when I first started when we didn't have a rep when I first started. And I would just drive around. I would go on the
Right.
internet. I would look for practices that said they were doing myopia management on their website, and I would just drive around. If I was in your area, I'd just stop by and introduce myself. Sometimes better presentation than others. But I found so many practices that said they do myopia management, but then when you really talk to them about it, they're not really doing it. Not the way that I understand it. What does that superficial part looks like for you, in your experience?
I think it's what we call the dabblers, right?
Mm-hmm.
The people that, maybe aren't doing orthokeratology at all, because that in and of itself is its own
Yes.
subspecialty for
Yes.
real. And in fact, if you don't really know what you're doing, then you're gonna fail more than you succeed, and it's actually gonna put a negative spin on what exactly it is that you're trying to do, because it's
Mm-hmm.
gonna make it look like it doesn't work or you don't know what you're doing. So I think that keeps a lot of people away from Ortho K, until they really put their mind into it. So you've got people that are certainly managing, soft contact lenses are relatively easy to fit. Managing a myopia management case with a soft lens is not necessarily easy to do, but
Right.
fitting a lens and putting a lens on an eye and keeping your fingers crossed and hoping for the best, I think is what a lot of doctors are doing. And that's okay because at least they're doing something. Doing something
Right.
is better than doing nothing. You've got a lot of doctors that might be prescribing atropine, and that's another good thing, but maybe they don't have a biometer. Maybe they're not actually measuring axial length. They're just looking at refractive status, and so that's, I think, the superficial level. You
Yes.
know,
Yeah. There's so many practices I've been in where it really comes down to just the language, but are they actually talking about it with their patients? If they got a myopia patient in the practice, would they even know what to do with it, with that patient? And you had mentioned that you've set up several referral networks with optometrists in your area. I want to go into that a little bit because that is often a very intimidating prospect of once you get going with ortho case specifically, but myopia management, once you really get going with it, you're looking at all these opportunities in your area of docs who are never going to do it. And that's totally fine. I'm the kind of person that says, hey, not everybody should be doing myopia management. Your associate is a dry eye specialist, if I'm not, that's their specialty.
He's behavioral optometrist,
That's
vision
what it is.
therapy. Hmm.
My apologies. Yes,
Yeah.
it's behavioral and vision therapy. Doesn't need to do myopia management. Like your associate found their specialty that works for them. You're the myopia person. They're the VT person. And so, how did you set up those referral networks? How, because ODs do not like to refer to each other. So, how did you make that
Well,
work?
um, uh, before I get there, let me just say that one thing that is really nice about our practice, and by the way, I want to make sure that we realize like vision therapy and binocular vision anomalies are myopia management as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Because those types of problems do drive myopia.
Right.
When you have lags of accommodation, when you have convergence insufficiencies and convergence excesses, when you have binocular vision problems, those things can feed into the myopia, monster.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's actually a lot of vision therapeutic benefits to managing myopia. So if he's got a myopia patient, he doesn't just automatically refer them to me because they may need to first fix their binocular system. Or maybe he refers to me to reduce the myopia, and then
Mm-hmm.
I refer back to him to dig into the binocular vision problem. So
Right.
it's a perfect marriage there. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. Like vision therapy and behavioral optometry is definitely part of managing myopia for sure.
Right. Okay.
Um, but how did I build the network? I'll tell you, it's not a great answer because I'm not the best marketer. I don't hit the pavement. I don't go to practices and tell them what I do. Um, but like I said, I've been in the same location for over 20 years. I've been practicing in Massachusetts for almost 30. And I was very active in the Mass Society of Optometry. I was very
Mm-hmm.
active when I was in IDOC. And so when I would meet, when I would go to these dinner meetings and there would be 30 or 20 or 30 docs there, they all, by the end of the meeting, knew what I was doing because I would tell them about these cool cases that I was working on. And so
Right.
it just sort of like happened almost like in a sort of unforced but kind of organic way that I've developed this reputation locally that, I know how to manage myopia. So,
Right.
I wish I could give you better advice as to this is what you need to do to get ODs to refer to you, but it's almost happened just sort of by reputation.
Yeah.
Um, that and I like to refer to other optometrists too. So, that there are two-way streets there. I'm not a I'm not a specialist in dry eye management. I'll refer those patients to local ODs, so
Mm-hmm.
um, low vision, for instance, I'll refer those to local ODs. So I think OD referrals are probably the biggest crime against optometry is that, our brothers and sisters just aren't
Yeah.
sending their patients to others to I don't know why. I don't know if it's an ego thing. I don't know if it's fear of losing
Yeah.
patients. Or maybe you just don't think of it. But
Yeah. I
you,
think
you
there's a
know,
lot of intimidation in that process. Like, I have spoken with, ODs that they said, well, if I send my patient to this doctor, especially if it's a myopia management doctor, I'm not getting that patient back. And so when that's why I wanted you to talk about it. Like how you're doing it is absolutely fine. Like I'm not looking for the magic touch or the secret, the silver bullet to referrals. But what I like is that you just were talking about what you do. You were talking about it with other people in in that space, and you were making that available to them, letting them know, and also creating opportunities for other referrals. And I feel like in my personal experience, there's just that intimidation factor of like, I'm going to lose that patient. You know, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I do. I think that that's a real fear. And I have the luxury of having more patients than I know what to do with.
Mm-hmm.
So at any given time, it might take several weeks to get an appointment to see me. Um, so I don't worry about if I refer a patient and they get lost to follow up, or they end up staying with whomever I referred them to. Like, yeah, sure. I might be sad especially if I have a nice relationship with that patient, but at the end of the day, it's not going to hurt my business. It's not going to hurt my practice to
Right.
lose one patient here or one patient there. Let's be honest. I mean, people move.
Yeah.
I live in a very high tech area, so there are a lot of people that move.
Mm-hmm.
They come, they're here for a couple of years, that another opportunity presents himself, and they move somewhere across the country. So we lose and gain patients all the time.
Right.
And so I don't think fear of losing a patient should be a reason to hold on to a patient when you can't necessarily manage them to the level that they should be
Yeah.
managed, you know?
Yeah, especially when, if you're not doing myopia management, because I say that over and over again. It's okay if you don't want to do myopia management, but if you have a patient that needs it, you need to refer that patient to somebody who does. Um,
Indeed.
so let me ask you this too, because I know that things weren't always this way. You had to grow and learn to get to this point. So if you don't mind, I'd like to go back years ago to before you even knew about myopia management and describe. So we have an idea of what your practice looks like now. So walk me through, what did your practice look like before myopia management? Like you're just learning about it, or if you've heard about it, it's kind of like gotten into your head, but you haven't taken that first step. Like describe what your practice looked like back then.
So when I started practicing with my current partner, John Avandanza, who, as we talked about, is behavioral OD, that was his specialty when we started the business together 21
Mm-hmm.
years ago. And he was very supportive of me finding my own passions.
Mm-hmm.
um he would have been very happy if I also wanted to get into vision therapy and stuff, but I felt like it might be a smarter business decision for us to have different specialties.
Right.
And so I sought that out for a while, and I was, dabbling in low vision for a little while, but I wasn't really all that great at it, to be honest, and I didn't really find the passion that one needs to do that kind of work, because that's
Mm-hmm.
tough work.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we just had this fitting set, that an ortho-K fitting set that he actually brought into the practice. He had done a couple of, early 2000s, that was the time, cases of ortho-K, but it was really, we weren't talking about managing myopia back in
Right.
04, 05. We were
Yeah.
just talking about, hey, this is a cool alternative to LASIK surgery to our adult patients, you know. And I remember I was like, hey, this is kind of cool. I could do this. Let me get certified in that. And I took the, certification, you know,
Right.
course, and had no idea what I was doing, but I started, you know, thinking that this was a cool thing. So, and I remember I had my first patient was a 30-something-year-old professional soft contact lens wearer who 2 to 3 times a year would show up in my office with just kind of a phantom, red irritated eye, had to take a couple of weeks off of wearing her contacts, hated wearing glasses, was reluctant to have LASIK surgery for, obvious reasons. And I said, well, why don't we try this? Because if you only have the lenses in your eyes for, 7 or 8 hours as opposed to 14 or 16 hours, like maybe that will be, the answer for you. It'll be a great alternative to the LASIK surgery. And that was we had success with it. And she
Right.
really loved it. Um, And then over the course of the next couple of years, I might have done 2 or 3 other cases. Like it was not something that I was really confident in.
Okay.
And I remember I got an email, I think, from the then Orthokeratology
Right.
Academy of America,
Yeah.
who I'd never heard of before, and it was like, if you're interested in Ortho K, you should come to this meeting. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. I think I might want to do that.
Yeah.
And I did, and I think it might have been in Arizona. So like I wasn't even used to really traveling for CE.
Okay.
The CE that I was doing was just all local stuff.
Hmm.
And I went to that meeting and it was just like, what is this? And who are these people?
Right.
Um, and it Carrie and Rob Garowitz and Tom Washevsky, Caroline Kauke, and these people were just like, I can't believe these people, what they're talking about and what they're doing. It's just super cool. And it was after that meeting that I got back to my office and I was like, all right, I'm gonna try to make a go of this.
Right.
Um, and actually I saw Nick Despotita say, he kind of pointed his finger and he said, don't dabble. If you're gonna do this, do it you
Right.
know, and I was using I actually, believe it or not, I did have a topographer in those days, even before I was doing Ortho K, just because I thought it was a useful piece of, equipment to have.
Hmm.
Um, but it was, I can't remember if it was at that meeting or if it was the one the next year that I went to the OAA meeting, and that's when I bought my Scout
Uh-huh.
topographer. And Wave was doing this thing where they were like, "Hey, if you buy a Scout topographer, we'll pay you back in lenses. You know, you're gonna drop
Right.
10 or 12 grand or whatever that number was, and every month you're gonna get 2 or 4 lenses, comped to kind of offset the price." And I was like, "I'm gonna make this happen."
Hmm.
Like this was the motivation I needed,
Right.
was to justify the purchase when I already had a topographer, but I wasn't really psyched with it. It wasn't a great topographer for doing Ortho K.
Yeah.
And that's when it really started to flourish and then really took off. Was when I put my mind to just like, all right, I'm going to understand how to make these lenses and I'm going to use them to offset the cost of this device. And then
Right.
it just kept getting better and better from there. And I learned so much from colleagues, from people that share.
Yeah.
Um, I got into this Wave group and guys like Dave Grosswald and Peter Wilcox and
Right.
the
Yeah.
late David Bartels, and they were like heroes to me. Julio Arroyo, like they taught me so much. And
Yeah.
then you get like super excited about it. You can't wait to like have your next patient come in and want to do it.
That's a big jump. Like, going from having done a couple of cases, like Wave is custom designed lenses. It's using software to custom design lenses. And, obviously you can speak to this way better than I can, but you can change everything in a Wave design system to create custom, like this is your design of an Ortho K lens. How did you make that jump from, because I think a lot of ODs find like those custom design softwares to be extremely intimidating. How
Yeah.
did you make the jump from, you did a couple of cases, I believe you said with a trial set. How did you make the jump from trial set to just designing your own lenses through Wave?
Well, like I said, I had a lot of guidance. I aligned myself with people that had already been using the product for
Mm-hmm.
longer than I had. And so we would discuss cases and I would send my ideas and can you take a look at this design and tell me what you think about it? I spent a day, I flew down to Florida. I spent a day with Ken Mahler
Mm-hmm.
and he really, showed me the utility,
Mm-hmm.
better than I was able to figure it out on my own. Of course, I did the training modules and stuff and that was helpful. Um, and at the end of the day, what I realize now, especially in retrospect and looking back, is that you can design your own lenses and you can spend 30 and 40 and 50 minutes laboring over every little click and every little button. Um, and as it turns out, I think that there's multiple ways of fitting a lens to an eye, and most of them are going to work. So
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, should I use a edge thickness of 0.3 or 0.25 or 0.28? Like at the end of the day, I don't know that it really made that huge of a difference. And so in those early days, you know, I will admit that I would maybe try one sort of design profile on the right eye and maybe a slightly different profile on the left eye, and I would kind
Hmm.
of see how those worked out. And then if one wasn't quite up to snuff, then I might refit that eye, into the version that was working properly,
Right.
And so uh, once I freed myself of being so concerned about every little click and realizing like give the lens just design the lens you have a good topography. If you have a good topography, the software is
Hmm.
smart enough to almost
Hmm.
design that lens for you with your guidance.
Right.
um and I think ultimately what's the best part about designing your own is when it comes to troubleshooting, because you can now see what isn't quite right and go
Right.
back in and figure out how to fix it. And you just can't be afraid. Like you just have to be confident that it's going to work. The best advice I could give anybody that's new to Ortho K is just don't make hasty changes.
Okay.
When
Yep.
I first started, it was like on day three, I was like, oh, this lens isn't right. I have to fix it. Like, no, like, these things take time.
Right.
You have to be
Yes.
patient,
Great point.
and you have to have faith, you know, that you understand the cornea, you understand what you need to try to do to
Yes.
correct, that refraction, and then you just go with it from there. I will say probably the biggest thing that really jumped me over the hurdle of being proficient at Ortho K was getting my fellowship.
Okay.
And
Yes.
so,
Why is that? I mean, I know why that is, but for our audience, why is the
so
fellowship
when
important?
when I made the decision to um to tr test for my fellowship in the Ortho K Academy,
Hmm.
for those of you who don't know. Um, it was actually Roxanne, Roxanne,
Hmm.
Sean Cohen.
Hmm.
She and I we were a year apart in school, and we knew each other in school. And we were chit-chatting. I had met her at I had seen her at one of the meetings. I hadn't seen her in years. And she was like, I think I'm going to go for fellowship next year. And I was like, all right, I'll do it too. And and it was great. I learned so much. You had to prepare cases,
Hmm.
which meant you couldn't BS your way through it. You
Right.
had to not just show this is what I did, like you had to show why this is what I did, and this is how I interpreted this cornea, and this is how I dealt with this refraction, and this is how I you know, fit this lens, and this is how I troubleshot this lens, and in those days we put a study group together, and that's where I met Jauma,
Hmm. Yep.
Payune, who's one of my dearest Ortho K buddies, and I just learned so much in that process and working with people and discussing all of it, that by the time I was done presenting my cases and defending my cases,
Hmm.
and you'll remember back in those days, I think I filled like three of those blue like examining books of with
Yes.
my hand was cramping by the end of it
Yes.
from the essays that I was writing. Um,
Oh my God. Yes.
it was like by the time I was done with that, I was like, I can't fail at this.
Right.
Like that was like that during that time is when I got that epiphany that Ortho K doesn't have to be hard. You know,
Interesting.
it
Yes.
it will always be complex, but it didn't have to be hard, you know?
So how do we
And
help people get to that conclusion? I think that's a great point. You're taking me back down memory lane because, I was with the academy through all these stages. That email that Paul received about that meeting in Arizona, I probably was the one that sent it out, pressed the
probably.
send button.
Uh-huh.
So it's just I'm having some joy here going back to through memory lane here. But how to go back to what you just said? Like, how does somebody get to that point then? how does somebody get to that? Ortho K doesn't have to be hard. It's complex, but it doesn't have to be hard because so many docs find it to be so intimidating. Like put a lens on the eye that made, do I make an adjustment? What's happening? Is it too steep? Is it too flat? It's 6 weeks. Why did we lose some of the treatment effect or whatever the case may be? How do you take some of that intimidation out of that process? How do you get to that point?
Well, by doing,
By
first of
doing.
all, you
Mm-hmm.
know, every case you do is one more, like, in the college football, they put the little emblem on their helmet for,
Mm-hmm.
every sack or every, tackle or every touchdown. It's like
Right.
every time you have another one of those in your pocket, it's like you learned something from that case.
Yeah.
Um, and so, like I said, then you realize like, wow, I actually really do know what I'm doing here. The more you do and the more successes that you have, the more confident that you get that you are in control. The
Mm-hmm.
lens is no longer in control, and keeping your fingers crossed and hoping that the lens is going to work because
Right.
if it's going to work, you know. And so I think, how do you get to that point? You just have to be willing to fail.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to be willing to eat some lenses.
Yeah.
I think if you get too stuck in, oh, I'm on my third lens, I'm on my fourth lens, I'm losing money on this case. Like, we're all going to take a bath on a case here or a case there.
Yeah.
It's going to happen. But the 90% of the cases that you get right on first try totally offsets that.
Right.
And I just looked at every lens that I took back from a patient and gave them a different one. Like every single one I looked at as the cost of education, you
Right.
know?
Great point.
Like, am
Yes.
I paying for continuing education? Sure. Like I'm going to lectures and I'm going to meetings and stuff. But every time I had a lens failure, like to me, I tried to learn something from it. I tried to
Right.
figure out, where did I go wrong here? Maybe it was an unrealistic expectation. Maybe I made too hasty of changes. Maybe I didn't have a greatest topography, but I was like, I'll just let it ride. Like
Mm-hmm.
those are the early mistakes that you make. And so, like I said, if you could justify that cost of education, even if it means you might lose on a case, then I think that's going to help build your confidence and get you, over that hump.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Like when I started working with J&J. All right, well, that's it for this regular version of the episode, but the discussion doesn't stop here. It actually continues in an extended version of this episode, which is available to our Substack supporters. You can, if you're interested in getting the rest of the episode, consider becoming a paid supporter of the Myopia Mindset. In addition to an extended version of this episode and every other episode that we do, you'll also get access to exclusive monthly bonus episodes of the Myopia Mindset. And I know you're interested. You've made it this far. And for the cost is $12 a month, which is basically the cost of a cup of coffee each and every week. And that's how I like to put it. Listen, if you would buy me a cup of coffee each and every week to nerd out about myopia, to bring on amazing guests, to spread the word about how awesome myopia management is and how more ECPs should be engaged in this specialty, then please consider becoming a paid supporter of the Myopia Mindset. You can do so on our Substack. myopiamindset.substack.com is how you do that. Thank you so much for your consideration. I'll see you at the next one.